Let me be direct with you from the outset. What we witnessed this morning is not another diplomatic statement. It is not routine military posturing. What we witnessed at 6:47 a.m. Eastern Time is a complete inversion of American strategic doctrine in the Middle East, announced not through official channels, not through the Pentagon, but through a coordinated leak to three European newspapers simultaneously. I am looking at reporting from Le Monde, The Guardian, and Der Spiegel that dropped within 90 minutes of each other, all citing the same unnamed senior State Department official, all carrying the same core message. The United States is prepared to accept a permanent Iranian presence in Syria in exchange for restrictions on uranium enrichment to 20%. Bloomberg has since confirmed the authenticity of these leaks with two additional American sources. What this represents is not a trial balloon. It is not exploratory diplomacy. What this represents is the most significant American retreat in the region since the fall of Saigon, dressed up as pragmatic realism. In the next 20 minutes, I'm going to walk you through exactly why this announcement signals the end of 40 years of containment policy, why it was deliberately leaked rather than announced, and why the consequences are already showing up in currency markets, defense contracts, and the military posture of at least four regional powers. Subscribe now if you have not already, because what we are about to cover is being actively analyzed by American military strategists, Israeli defense officials, and Gulf monarchies trying to calculate what Washington's word is actually worth. This is not speculation. This is geopolitical realignment happening in real time. Let's start with Syria itself, because geography explains everything here. Syria sits at the intersection of three critical zones. To the west, the Mediterranean coast at Tartus and Latakia, where Russia maintains its only warm water naval facilities outside the Black Sea. To the east, the Iraqi border and the land corridor connecting Tehran to Beirut, what Israeli military doctrine calls the Shia Crescent. To the south, the Golan Heights and the contested border with Israel. Control of Syrian territory means control of logistics, missile placement, and power projection across the entire eastern Mediterranean. The Assad regime, backed by Russia and Iran, has held approximately 70% of Syrian territory since 2020. Iranian forces, including Revolutionary Guard Corps advisors and Hezbollah fighters, are embedded in at least 47 documented locations, according to the Institute for the Study of War. The United States, for its part, maintains roughly 900 troops in eastern Syria, officially focused on counter-ISIS operations but functionally serving as a tripwire against Iranian expansion. That is the official narrative. That was the official narrative until this morning. According to Jane's Defense Weekly, American forward operating bases in Al Tanf and the Kurdish-controlled Northeast have cost taxpayers approximately $1 billion annually to maintain since 2018. The strategic justification has always been the same: prevent Iran from establishing a permanent military infrastructure that threatens Israel and destabilizes the region. Every administration since Reagan has maintained some version of this containment doctrine. Subscribe if you are watching this and realizing that this principle, repeated by every Secretary of State for 4 decades, just evaporated in a coordinated European press leak. Now, let's talk about what actually changed overnight. Announcement number 1, the uranium enrichment cap. And this one matters more than anything else because it represents a complete reversal of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action negotiation posture. The 2015 Iran nuclear deal, which the Trump administration abandoned in 2018, capped Iranian enrichment at 367%, sufficient for civilian nuclear power but far below weapons-grade material, which requires 90% enrichment. Iran currently enriches uranium to 60% at its Fordo facility, according to the International Atomic Energy Agency's most recent report dated April 22, 2026. That is 9/10 of the way to a nuclear weapon. The leaked proposal accepts Iranian enrichment at 20%. 20% is the threshold for medical isotope production in research reactors, but it is also the threshold that makes breakout time to a weapon measured in weeks rather than years. David Albright, former UN weapons inspector and president of the Institute for Science and International Security, has stated publicly that, and I am quoting him directly here, a nation enriching to 20% can reach 90% in approximately 21 to 28 days with sufficient centrifuge capacity. Iran currently operates more than 9,000 IR-6 advanced centrifuges. They have the capacity. The American position for the past 8 years has been zero enrichment above 5%. The leaked position is 20%. That is not a compromise. That is a surrender on the central proliferation question, wrapped in technical language that sounds reasonable to anyone not familiar with centrifuge physics. Received. That is announcement number 1. Announcement number 2, the Syria concession. This is the part that 3 Israeli cabinet ministers have already condemned in statements released within the past 6 hours. The leaked framework explicitly acknowledges Iran's right to maintain military advisors in Syria for, and I am quoting the Der Spiegel piece here, defensive and counterterrorism purposes. It does not define what defensive means. It does not specify numbers. It does not include verification mechanisms. Let me be extremely clear about what this language permits. Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps forces, currently estimated at 3,000 to 5,000 personnel by the Center for Strategic and International Studies, would receive de facto American recognition. The weapon shipments flowing through Damascus International Airport and the land routes from Iraq would continue. The missile production facilities that Israeli intelligence claims exist in Masyaf and elsewhere would operate without American objection. All of this legitimized through a framework that the United States itself is proposing. The geopolitical implications are staggering. Israel has conducted more than 400 airstrikes against Iranian targets in Syria since 2017, according to tracking by the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. Every one of those strikes has operated under the assumption that the United States views Iranian presence in Syria as illegitimate and destabilizing. If Washington now accepts that presence as permanent, Israel loses its most important diplomatic cover. It loses the argument that it is acting in concert with American regional strategy. It becomes, in the eyes of international law, the aggressor striking the territory of a sovereign nation hosting the invited military forces of an ally. Prime Minister Netanyahu has not yet issued a formal statement, but Defense Minister Yoav Gallant told Army Radio this afternoon, and I am quoting him, "We do not accept, we will not accept, and we will not operate according to an American framework that endangers Israeli civilians." That is as close to a public break with Washington as Israel has come in 30 years. Stay with me because this is where the narrative completely changes and where the question of why this was leaked rather than announced becomes impossible to ignore. Announcement number 3, and this one almost nobody in the mainstream media is connecting correctly. Saudi Arabia has suspended arms negotiations with the United States. Reuters reported 4 hours ago that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman has paused talks on a $2 billion purchase of F-35 fighter jets and advanced missile defense systems. The official reason given was, quote, concerns about regional stability and the need to reassess strategic partnerships. The actual reason is that Riyadh just watched Washington grant Iran everything the Saudis have spent a decade trying to prevent. Think carefully about what this represents. Saudi Arabia and Iran are not allies. They are sectarian rivals who have fought proxy wars in Yemen, Lebanon, Bahrain, and Iraq for 40 years. The entire Abraham Accords framework, the normalization agreements between Israel and Gulf states, was built on a shared threat perception: Iranian expansionism. If the United States now accepts Iranian military dominance in Syria and a near-weapons-grade enrichment program, the foundational logic of the Abraham Accords collapses. Why would Saudi Arabia or the UAE or Bahrain continue to align with Israel against Iran if the Americans themselves are accommodating Tehran? The answer is they would not, and they are not. The Saudi arms suspension is not symbolic. It is the first move in a recalibration that will ripple through every defense treaty, every intelligence sharing agreement, and every diplomatic commitment in the region. And it happened within 12 hours of the leak. That speed tells you the Saudis were already planning for this. They saw it coming, received. That is announcement number 3. Now let's talk about what is really happening behind the headlines, because there are 2 stories playing out simultaneously and the mainstream media is only covering one of them. The first story is the one you will hear on cable news tonight. America is engaging in pragmatic diplomacy, accepting the reality on the ground in Syria, pursuing nuclear de-escalation through compromise. That is the narrative the State Department wants you to accept. The second story is the one being discussed in classified briefings in Jerusalem, Riyadh, and Abu Dhabi right now. And that story is about American credibility, or more precisely, the complete absence of it. Every alliance the United States has built in the Middle East for half a century is based on a single promise: we will contain Iran. We will prevent a Shia hegemon from dominating the region. We will back our partners when it matters. That promise was tested in 2011 when Obama declined to enforce the red line in Syria. It was tested again in 2015 when the Iran deal was signed over Saudi objections. It is being tested again right now. And this time, the American position is not just accommodation, it is capitulation. The White House has not commented officially because it cannot. If this framework is real, and the reporting suggests it is, then announcing it through formal channels would trigger a political firestorm domestically. Republicans would call it appeasement. Pro-Israel Democrats would revolt. So instead, it was leaked to European outlets, allowing the administration to gauge reaction, walk it back if necessary, or let it be normalized through repetition before any official confirmation. This is not diplomacy. This is policy by trial balloon, conducted through foreign newspapers to avoid domestic accountability. Trump, to his credit or recklessness, depending on your perspective, responded to questions about the leaks this afternoon by saying, and I am quoting him, "We are looking at a lot of options. A lot of people want deals. We will see what happens." That is not a denial. That is not a confirmation. That is the kind of studied ambiguity that lets everyone interpret it according to their hopes or fears. What it does not do is reassure allies that American commitments mean anything. Think carefully about what this represents. When the United States conducts a strategic reversal of this magnitude and communicates it through leaks rather than announcements and responds to allied objections with ambiguity rather than clarity, that is not diplomacy. That is not negotiation. That is a superpower in retreat, unwilling to defend the frameworks it spent decades constructing, hoping that allies will adjust quietly rather than defect publicly, and some of them will adjust. And some of them will defect. The Saudis are already signaling which path they are considering. If you own energy stocks, if you track defense sector volatility, if you follow currency fluctuations in the shekel or the rial, what is happening in the Middle East right now is not a foreign policy story, it is a portfolio story. Lockheed Martin's stock dropped 1% in after-hours trading on the Saudi arms news. Brent crude futures jumped 4% on speculation that regional instability will increase. The Israeli shekel weakened against the dollar for the fourth consecutive session. These are not coincidences. These are markets pricing in a new reality where American security guarantees are conditional, revocable, and subject to change without notice. This pattern has repeated throughout history, and every time it repeats, the outcome is the same. Let me take you back to the Peloponnesian War, 431 to 404 BC. Athens and Sparta, the two great powers of the Greek world, went to war. 27 years, tens of thousands dead. Both city-states exhausted, their treasuries drained, their populations decimated. And who won? Persia. Persia, which stayed out of the direct fighting, funded both sides intermittently and waited. When Athens and Sparta had destroyed each other, Persia became the dominant power in the eastern Mediterranean for the next century. The parallel is exact. The United States and its allies have spent trillions of dollars in 2 decades fighting wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and Yemen. Iran has spent a fraction of that, funding proxies, building influence, waiting. And now, at the moment when American will is exhausted and the political appetite for Middle Eastern engagement has evaporated, Iran steps into the vacuum, not through conquest, through patience. The United States is Athens. The coalition of Gulf states and Israel is Sparta. And Iran is Persia, watching its rivals collapse under the weight of their own overextension. So where does this leave us? Let me give you 3 clear paths because there is no honest middle ground here. Path 1, the leak is real and the framework moves forward. Iran accepts the 20% enrichment cap in exchange for sanctions relief and implicit American recognition of its Syrian presence. Israel conducts a limited strike against Iranian nuclear facilities in the next 6 to 8 weeks, daring Washington to condemn it publicly. The United States issues a pro forma objection but takes no action. Saudi Arabia and the UAE accelerate their normalization with Iran through Chinese-mediated talks, freezing out American influence entirely. Within 18 months, the Abraham Accords are effectively dead, and the Gulf security architecture collapses. That is Path 1. Path 2, the leak is a negotiating tactic, and the framework collapses under Allied pressure. Netanyahu meets with Trump in the next 72 hours and extracts a commitment that no deal will proceed without Israeli approval. The Saudis quietly communicate that arms deals and intelligence cooperation are contingent on walking back the Iran accommodations. The framework dies, but the damage to American credibility lingers. Every ally now knows that Washington considered abandoning them, and they plan accordingly. That is Path 2. Path 3, and this is the one I think is most likely, the framework proceeds in diluted form. Enrichment cap at 20%. Iranian presence in Syria acknowledged but with vague restrictions that are never enforced. Israel continues airstrikes but with reduced frequency and American diplomatic cover. Saudi Arabia pursues a dual-track strategy, maintaining ties with Washington while opening channels to Tehran. The region enters a prolonged period of ambiguity where nobody trusts anyone, every agreement is conditional, and the risk of miscalculation increases exponentially. That is Path 3. And it is the path that leads to the next war, not the one that prevents it. I think we are on path 3 right now, and the indicators over the next 2 weeks will tell us definitively. Watch for an Israeli delegation to Washington. Watch for Saudi statements on Iran normalization. Watch for Iranian state media commentary on the enrichment question. Those 3 indicators will tell you far more than any State Department briefing or White House press conference. Here are the questions I want you to take away. First, if the United States is willing to reverse 40 years of Iran policy based on electoral exhaustion and budget constraints, what other commitments are negotiable? NATO Article 5, the defense of Taiwan, the nuclear umbrella over South Korea? Second, if American allies cannot trust Washington to maintain positions it has held for decades, where do they turn? Beijing, Moscow, regional security pacts that exclude the United States? And third, what happens when the next crisis emerges in the Strait of Hormuz or the Golan Heights, and every actor in the region is operating from the assumption that American red lines are suggestions rather than commitments? Those questions do not have comfortable answers, but they are the questions that matter far more than whether this specific deal proceeds or collapses. Tell me in the comments what you think the Israeli response will be. Tell me if you think the Saudis are serious about freezing American arms deals or if this is negotiating pressure. Tell me if you believe this leak was intentional policy signaling or a mid-level bureaucrat trying to tank the framework before it gets formalized. We will keep tracking every development in Jerusalem, Riyadh, Tehran, and Washington. That is what we do every single day. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone in your network who is trying to understand what just shifted in the Middle East and why it matters. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update when the Israeli response drops, and we will see you in the next briefing.